Hello and welcome to this round 6 of the Mythic Championship here in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Simon Gertzen, and we're going to get a chance to see a little bit more standard from the feature match area. Now, Simon, we've been looking at the metagame and trying to get a feel for what is being played in the field in general, but also what's being played at the kind of MPL level, like where players have really decided to put their money where their mouth is, and a lot of them have been going for variations on Sultai. But I think it's important for us to talk a little bit about the fact that not all of these Sultai decks are built quite equal.
Yeah, we actually have at least 2 different Sultai lists. One is the classical that still has the full Explore package with Wild Growth Walker, and then other decks are actually going for more blue cards. You can see cards like Thought Erasure, like Thief of Sanity in the main deck already, which is almost like a pre-boarded version of Sultai Midrange.
And that is exactly what we're going to get a chance to check out in our feature match area this very round. It's going to be very interesting to see whether or not this build ends up ultimately being able to play out the build that's maybe a little bit bluer, with the Thief of Sanities and so on, whether or not that's going to be able to do what it needs to in our feature match area. Our feature match area with a whole host of talent, much of it from the MPL, it must be said. So we've got Piotr Glogowski that we're going to get a chance to see against Jean-Emmanuel Depraz. Let's head down to our feature match area to check out how that one goes right now. Hello and welcome to this round 6 here from Cleveland, Ohio, the very first Mythic Championship, and we get a chance to see our players vying for constructed mastery. Here we have Piotr Glogowski on the left of our screen from Poland. He is on, well, we've just spoken about it, Simon, an interesting variation on Sultai Midrange in as much as he has Thief of Sanity to work with, and on the other side of things from Glogowski, well, we have another member of our MPL, that being the Frenchman Jean-Emmanuel Depraz. There you see him. He is just in a very zen place right now as we prepare for this game to start. And we're going to be kicking things off early doors with some comparatively similar-looking plays, each of them initially looking to get their mana sorted. But as we get into the mid and late game, we might see a little bit of variation here. Early doors, got an Incubation Druid coming down from Glogowski, and in his build, there's actually a full 4 of them, meaning that he can relatively consistently get them down, though can't necessarily keep them around with the likes of Cast Down on the other side of things from Depraz. Thought Erasure coming from Glogowski. This will be one of the first indications to Depraz that maybe he's not got a pure mirror match going on here. Glogowski, he's going to get a chance to look through what's going on in Jean-Emmanuel's hand, take out a key card before it becomes too much of a threat, and indeed get Surveil for 1 on top of everything.
Yeah, and this is already looking quite nice for Glogowski. Depraz was on a mulligan. He has a very land-heavy hand, and Hostage Taker, once it's known, is a lot less scary to play against, and of course Hydroid Crace is the pick here.
Yeah, Hydroid Craces #1 goes away, and figuring out what to do about specifically Hydroid Craces is one of the sort of the linchpins of this matchup, I suppose, and that one of the reasons that Thief of Sanity gets interesting.
Yeah, and then you have basically a Hydroid Craces battle. Who has the bigger Craces? Who draws more cards? Who has more finalities to recur Hydroid Craces? And an interesting choice to play 3 Hostage Takers. It's clear that this is a choice for Glogowski because he is so heavily blue, but even Depraz thinks that Hostage Taker is so important to play 3 in the main deck.
Yeah, it's a straightforward way of, first off, removing a Hydroid Crasis, but secondly, making it so that even if something horrible were to happen, it's not going to come back for your opponent in a useful fashion.
And we've talked about the fact that Glogowski is actually opting not to play any Wild Growth Walkers in the main deck. Instead, he has those 4 Thief of Sanities. But even Depraz doesn't go for the full Explore package, has only 2 Wild Growth Walkers.
Now, looking at the hand of Piotr Glogowski there, he has Straight Fire. He's got Vraska's Contempt and Assassin's Trophy to deal with whatever threats that come down. He's got a Hydroid Craces of his own, but right now, no great need to play it out early doors. The later you can leave it, the more mana you have, the bigger the effect of that cast trigger. So, at least for now, even though there's not a lot being played onto the battlefield, do not let that fool you. There's plenty that sort of is being worked towards here by each of these players.
But it is a bit punishing here for Glogowski because he's not drawing any more lands, and this is just really scary if you have to pass over and over again Whereas Depraz, who wasn't holding a lot, is just making his land drops, because that means you're just gonna be at mercy of these Crazies and maybe a Vraska Relic Seeker to come down, which is the reason why Glogowski actually went for Crazies on 2.
Crazies on 4 coming from Depraz. He successfully managed to find another copy of it off the top of his deck, even after the first one had been hit by Thought Erasure. And he does also have Find Finality in hand, which means that he can potentially get back still more copies of Hydroid Crazies if he so chooses. Here is our first Thief of Sanity of the game. And this might be enough that it means that Depraz starts looking at the finality half of Find Finality as a way of cleaning up this board just a little bit.
Yeah. It's actually an interesting decision point here for Depraz, who has a lot of cards that he can cast. Hostage Taker is clearly an option. Just maybe taking that Thief of Sanity for your own use. In essence, what happens here, it's almost like in a control matchup where where there are so many answers in both of these decks that it's difficult to stick a threat. So even though Thief of Sanity is better in this matchup than, let's say, Wildgrowth Walker, it's still not very likely to connect and take over the game.
Gradually, each of these boards going wider. And potentially, this is a game that has a chance of going quite long. Each of these players having a lot of different sources of card advantage where necessary, a lot of ways of removing opposing threats. And the life totals here only moving upward, albeit only very slightly, thanks to these copies of Hydroid Crazies coming along. For those of you wondering how we're choosing to pluralize Crazies, we're going for Crazies rather than anything else. I like to think of Crazies as coming from the same root as Crisis, because quite frankly, it's a bit of a pain when it comes on the other side of the battlefield.
For the opponent, yeah. And you actually see here an interesting exchange where Glogowski goes for the cast down on the Crazies, but Depraz used only 5 of his 7 mana, exactly for the play that we just saw, to cast down the Thief of Sanity. So he knew that Glogowski would be incentivized to kill the Crazies. He got to kill the Thief and doesn't get hit by it.
For now, though, the creatures themselves kind of staring off against one another. The advantage bar moving a little bit more to Depraz, and I have to wonder how much of that, Simon, is simply due to the fact that he's the one with a few more cards in hand and the mana to be able to deploy them.
Yeah, we almost missed it. Suddenly the game just slipped away from Glogowski. I think missing his 5th land drop was really the main issue, and he has drawn too much removal. Of course, he gets to use it here, but Depraz is the one that's dictating the pace of play, which is not where you want to be in the Sultai Midrange mirror.
And we saw there Vraska's Contempt in response to the trigger from Hostage Taker, meaning that it never got a chance to take away that Crasis. That's the only time that you can really do that. Once it's taken the Crasis, even if you get rid of the Hostage Taker, when he returns, he's not a very big jellyfish at all.
Here you see one of the key interactions: get back those Crasis with Find, and then recast them over and over again. Actually, Depraz feels that he can afford to get Llanowar Elves here just to have a little bit of a mana boost instead of going for more greedy lines.
I mean, I suppose that if you say that this is a matchup all about Hydroid Crasis, who gets to resolve a bigger one, then secretly what you're saying is this is a matchup all about mana, who can get the most lands in play, and it almost becomes a much more traditional control matchup, even if in point of fact we're not talking about counter magic, we're just talking about other big spells.
It's a weird kind of control matchup where it takes longer for one side to actually win the game, but you are snowballing more and more because the player who plays the bigger Crazies just gets bigger Crazies over time.
There we go. So Hostage Taker here. Piotr Glogowski electing not to wait around for a very kind of high-value threat to take away. But in taking a Merfolk Branchwalker, he did get the Explore there, did find himself another land. And as we previously mentioned, all of those lands, they do have worth, even in the mid and late game. This is not a format which is punishing these decks, at least, for getting flooded. Yeah,
Glogowski is looking at a really poor hand of a land and Assassin's Trophy, whereas Depraz has all the gas he wants. Hydroid Crazies. He also is holding Vraska Relic Seeker has been holding her for a while. So this is looking dire for Glogowski, who needs to top deck something here. Maybe a Planeswalker to start off with. Vivian Reed would be a good draw.
I mean, once you start talking about these bigger copies of Hydroid Krasis coming into play, I mean, a 7/7 coming into play for Jean-Emmanuel Depraz there, drawing him 3 cards, getting him 3 life, I start thinking about the card almost in the same sort of terms as Sphinx's Revelation in Control decks, where once you cast a big one, it potentially finds you another one, and things get out of control to the point that it becomes difficult to fight back.
And maybe we should mention how this deck evolved, because Hydroid Krasis is the new addition from RNA, but it used to be that we were looking at Golgari mid-range mirror matches, and it was all about the Carnage Tyrants, the Planeswalkers, and Find Finality. And Finality not only as a way to recur threats, but also to just wrath the board, and you have the big Carnage Tyrant to stick. Now the dynamics have shifted towards being more about Hydroid Krasis rather than Carnage Tyrants, but Planeswalkers are still super powerful because both Vivian Reed and Vraska can take down Hydroid Krasis, and usually it's difficult to force through too much damage on the ground.
Yeah, we see here Piotr Glogowski, he clears out the big Hydroid Krasis, gets an attack in, but these life totals, they're barely being touched here. We're not in a spot where either player is in imminent danger in terms of losing the game fast. It's just going to be a matter of who can leverage the cards they've got to slowly but surely eke an advantage out. And right now, even losing that gigantic Jellyfish Beast, there's still the issue of all of these cards in hand that Jean-Emmanuel is working with. A challenging one for our card in hand viewer, the old Hydroid Krasis, just because there's so many additional cards coming along all the time.
But I think the cards in hand really show who is advantaged here. We're looking at a 7-card hand for Depraz, and Glogowski must be on 1 or 2 cards maximum.
Yeah, very difficult situation to deal with there. You can see everything that the Frenchman's working with there. A French copy of that hostage taker there sat in hand for him. Now, Wildgrowth Walker, not at its best in this matchup. This is not a matchup where the life totals are typically as assaulted as we might have seen in previous rounds, but it's still growing larger with each and every explore that happens, and that means that it's going to be a 2-mana threat that relatively quickly can start attacking on the ground and doing some meaningful damage.
Yeah, and it does have the potential to grow out of a Finality range, which is definitely relevant in this matchup.
And as soon as Vraska Relic Seeker comes down, in spite of the fact that Piotr Glogowski is still at a pretty much untouched life total there, he scoops them up. He can see that he's dealing with too many threats on the battlefield, too many cards in hand from his opponent, and he just has too big a hill to climb to be able to get through this. And mindful perhaps also of the clock, he elects to pack that game in, and he will be trying to figure out a way of winning out in future games. These players just beginning to look to their sideboard here. We will be back with them when they get to their game 2 right after these messages. Hello and welcome back to this round 6 here at the very first Mythic Championship here in Cleveland, Ohio. And we're going to get a chance, just while we see our main players there, just shuffling up before their game 2, to get a little bit of a look in on some of the other magic going on in our feature match area. And here we have Autumn Birchett from England up against Yoshihiko Ikawa of Japan. And we have Mono Blue, which we've seen a little bit in the feature match area already, up against Esper Control on the other side of things for Ikawa here. And a Thought Erasure, by the looks of things, just on the stack here. Autumn, Autumn has that negate in hand, elects to just allow it to go there. Ultimately, Wizard's Retort being taken, lots of counter magic in that hand, and with threats already on the battlefield and a game up for Autumn here, it's looking pretty good.
Yeah, this is actually a fascinating matchup. I've played this a ton from the Esper Control side, especially after sideboarding, and you have to realize that the Esper Control deck is not actually the one that has control over the situation most of the time.
And it has fewer counter spells, right?
Exactly, and I board out my counter magic. I just go for removal, and hope to kind of run the blue deck out of answers.
And with Ravnica Allegiance in the mix, Autumn here does have access to Terramander, and Terramander not dramatically difficult to get large and in charge.
No, not in this matchup. It's effectively a 5/5. Whenever you have the mana to do that. Of course, Birchett, they don't want to maybe lose their creatures to removal spells, instant removal spells, so maybe not even activating at the end of turn. Can't quite see the count, the enchantment, the instant count.
I mean, the life total count here, if anything, the most pertinent bit of counting going on. Just 8 points of life left to Yoshihiko Ikawa here, and well, not too many cards in hand either. Already knows that there is counter magic on the other side of the table. This a very, very rough spot.
Yeah. Autumn, I believe, winning her RPDQ also with Mono Blue.
And the gate there coming from Birchett, and that means that we're getting ever closer to the point where Terramanders can very, very easily get big, and I think that this might be the turn for it to happen. Ikawa very much needed to get some removal resolved there, and it just wasn't happening. And this could be Birchett advancing to 6-0 on the tournament.
One Terramander being pumped is not enough to have lethal this turn, so you have to go for both.
And there's the handshake. Autumn Birchett advancing to 6-0. Congratulations, England, at least for now, as an undefeated player in the tournament. And 6 rounds in, none too shabby. We get a chance to jump back to our main match here. Each of these players coming in at 4-1. Piotr Glogowski there you see from Poland on one side in the red hoodie there. On the other side of things, another member of our MPL, our Magic Pro League, 32 players. That is Jean-Emmanuel Depraz of France kicking things off on his side of things with a turn 1 Llanowar Elves. It'll be interesting to see whether or not Glogowski, whose deck, we described it as almost feeling like it was pre-boarded for this matchup in Game 1. He did succumb in Game 1, whether or not he's going to be able to bounce back here as we get into these post-sideboard games. A few sideboard cards that he does get a chance to bring in here, even though we feel like his list is already, on paper at least, pretty solid.
The thing about this matchup after sideboarding, it doesn't get that much different from Game 1, and it looks like Depraz is on the same game plan of just having enough lands and then hopefully drawing into Crazies later on.
Yeah, it might not actually be a terrible plan, because if we're working on the assumption that typically in this particular matchup you don't have these explosive starts with lots of damage coming through, and you do want to hit every land drop such that when you find a Hydroid Crasis it's that much scarier, then I mean, if your opponent's kept a hand full of creature removal, then actually your hand full of lands, what are they even doing in that time?
Or even discard spells. Yeah, I love the idea of keeping mana-heavy hands with in the Sultai Midrange mirror match. There are just a few cards that do punish you, like an accelerated Planeswalker or a turn 3 Thief of Sanity. Suddenly you don't have an answer and the game spirals out of control.
So Incubation Druid coming down for Glogowski. He just has to look on as Depraz uses Find to get back a couple of creatures here. Llanowar Elves coming back down. There's also a Hostage Taker now in hand for the Frenchman. Meanwhile, Glogowski, he's going to be able to potentially upgrade that Sage this turn if he wants to. I must admit, I do like the Incubation Druid quite a bit. The fact that it's both meaningful mana acceleration and mana fixing, and can actually attack in for a reasonable amount of damage, can survive a finality if it needs to. It just solves a lot of issues.
It does. I don't love it in this matchup because of how threats and answers stack up against each other. I think it's just too often not going to be relevant on the battlefield, or if it is, your opponent can take care of it with a removal spell, or even better, a hostage taker.
So Vivian Reed coming down, just ticking up for this turn to try and find a creature. Looks like plenty of lands in the top 4 being seen there for Glogowski. Can't quite make out just one creature, and it's another Incubation Druid. Just takes the land.
Piotr has been a bit unfortunate, I think. The way his deck has been producing these draws, it doesn't seem like he is really maximizing his chances here.
Though it must be said, in this instance, if this matchup, mana is a big deal. He has a slight mana advantage over his opponent. He also has a Planeswalker in play, so in total, things going passing fair here for Glogowski. He just needs kind of the exclamation point on this draw, which is Hydroid Krasis, I would say.
Yeah, if Depraz doesn't punish the Vivian here, doesn't have Vraska's Contempt, or at least a Krasis this turn, that's huge, because now Vivian Reed is potentially just going out of control.
Yeah, once again, Vivian Reed getting activated to try and find something. Finding lands, not the most exciting, but sooner or later, Vivian Reed will find more. And in the meantime, at least those lands do mean that he's going to be able to set up something exciting for later. Another Incubation Druid coming along. One of those Incubation Druids will be able to get large at the end of this turn if there's nothing better to do.
So that's also holding back the Branch Walker now. And Depraz this time around actually only drew lands. He had that one fine finality to get back 2 creatures. All his other draw steps have been land.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, this make a lot of land drops plan, you have to do something else.
Well, yeah, you should draw some spells at some point.
Vivian Reed is not going to be able to pick up that Vraska, but can pick up a Thief of Sanity. And this is exactly what you said the potential danger of the Lands and Hope plan could be. If this Thief of Sanity starts connecting, it can deal some real damage to the game plan of Jean-Emmanuel Depraz. Even though the life totals right now very much favor the Frenchman, Piotr Glogowski of Poland, he is the one very much in the driver's seat here. There comes the Thief. Clearly, mana not an issue to be able to cast the variety of cards that might come off the top of Depraz's deck here.
Yeah, if you're Glogowski, you don't expect this Thief to survive. You expect Depraz to be holding maybe 2 removal spells, but instead Depraz is looking at a hand of 4 lands.
Now we get a chance to see, with the Oscars coming up, whether or not Depraz wants to make a performance himself. He says, you know what? This is not my year. He's not going for the EGOT. He's not even going for the O of it. He's just going to game 3, hoping that he's going to be able to find something to be able to win it out in the next one.
And that's about information, right? It's about the Thief of Sanity trigger revealing too much of his deck. So combined with the really low percentage chance that he's coming back into this game, he just prefers to play game 3 without Piotr getting potential information about sideboarding.
I mean, time also a factor. It's something that I think these guys have about 30 minutes left on the round, so it's unlikely that anything's going to go to time, but it's one of the most frustrating ways, for me at least, for matches to end, just not quite able to find the way of actually closing them out. So these guys are going to be going to their sideboards. They're going to be checking out what they want to do soon enough. But in the meantime, we're going to get a chance to see former world champion Shahar Shenhar up against Andrew Cuneo. And these guys are late in the game. And bizarrely, we're in a situation where Andrew Cuneo is the one facing off against Mono Blue. And he's picked up Mountains. Shenhar, he's got a popular choice amongst various pros here in Mono Blue. And after sideboarding, he's got the likes of Surgemare even in play here, alongside Terramander with a Curious Obsession on it. On the other side of things, there is an Experimental Frenzy in play for Andrew Cuneo here, so don't bother looking at the number of cards or the quality of the cards in Andrew Cuneo's hand. That's not what it's all about. He's got a whole bunch of mana to work with, and he is going to be playing lots of cards off the top of his deck, potentially.
Well, if he gets more time to do that, because he is facing down quite the clock here with the Terramander alone threatening lethal.
Yeah, a lot of mana available for Shahar Shenhar here. A fair amount of instants in the graveyard by the looks of things. So he will be able to adapt, I would imagine. And it might be that this is lights out for Andrew Cuneo here. Already a game down to Shahar Shenhar. This is going to be a tough one to come back from.
Shenhar also at 7. So if Cuneo really gets another turn, he would have had a good chance of winning. But Shenhar correctly identifies that he has to activate the Terramander here to just take it.
So Shahar Shenhar, that was him advancing to 4-2. So Andrew Cuneo now on a 3-3 record. Not exactly where he would be hoping to be at this stage in the tournament, but good work from Shahar, and we're going to get a chance to jump back and see how things are going for Glogowski and Depraz. It looks like this time around, Depraz on a mulligan.
Yeah, just like in game 1. Mulligan to 6 there as well.
And after sideboarding, where you have particular cards that you've brought in that you believe will hopefully be high-impact cards in the matchup, I presume that there's a slightly higher chance of taking mulligans for strategic purposes rather than simply to try and make sure that mana pans out.
Well, to be fair, after sideboarding, it's almost like all of your cards are equally good, or at least the
There shouldn't be any bad cards.
Exactly. You're not looking at an opening hand which is just not playable in the matchup.
As things stand, it looks like Glogowski happy with his opening hand. You see there giving absolutely nothing away on his face about what he might be working with. These are high-stakes matches for all of these players looking to really make a mark on this Mythic Championship.
And Thief of Sanity is really a weird card in that regard, because in this matchup, you really don't need an early cast down in your opening hand. But then there are these turn 2 Thief of Sanities where you absolutely have to have a removal spell or something to deal with it.
So this is a 1-land hand with a Lamoire Elf that has been kept with a scry from Depraz. I believe that was a card going to the bottom on that scry.
But it was only a Woodland Cemetery. If that's an Overgrown Tomb, I think he has a really good hand. With a tapped land, it's a different story.
So we see essentially Glogowski with the kind of mocking alternative of these hands. He does have the Overgrown turn, meaning he gets the Lamoire Elves down that much earlier, and a turn 2 Thief of Sanity. This is how Piotr Glogowski drew it up. Let's see what it is that Jean-Emmanuel Depraz can do in the face of this start. Because, I mean, if we look at Depraz's hand, even if we say, okay, the mana is going to work out because he's got a land and a Lamoire Elves, he still doesn't have a cheap way of interacting with that Thief of Sanity.
He also doesn't have a blue source yet. He needs 4 mana to get up to Hostage Taker. That's a lot of things you need. And what if Thief of Sanity just hits removal spells? Just cast down your mana creature.
All right, and explore into another greenback land, this time an Overgrown Tomb.
And Depraz went for the risky play there, but got rewarded. He had to, because otherwise he's just falling too far behind.
Thief of Sanity getting its first actual connection in this match. This is the match that Piotr Glogowski would have been hoping for when it came to this, and it looks like there's Vivian Reed. I think that was a Disdainful Stroke and a land on the top of Jean-Emmanuel Depraz's deck. Now, the fact that the card gets exiled face down means that now Jean-Emmanuel Depraz needs to think about all of the cards in his own deck that he might have to play around.
Yeah, and he also knows that it's not Vivian Reed, so he can assume that the card that Glogowski took is better than Vivian Reed.
My goodness, we have 2 copies of Thief of Sanity here. If ever there was a game where Thief of Sanity is going to be very relevant, exactly this one. There has not been the early answer to a single Thief of Sanity, so the second one here just really turning the screws on what it is that Jean-Emmanuel Depraz can do here, and Glogowski looking to try and close this door before the mana woes of his opponent can be dealt with. A small attack in here from a Merfolk is not going to do a whole lot. There's no temptation at all for Glogowski to block here, and there is the blue source, meaning that Hostage Taker gets to take and then allow the casting of Lamoire Elves. It's Elves and Merfolk versus Thief of Sanity deck.
Interesting choice to take the elves there. Basically saying you can have all the cards you want, I'm hoping that your mana situation is in a way that you're just not.
Wow, 2 copies of Hydroid Craces at least here, I think. This is going to create an interesting information delivery from Glogowski. Let's see if we can make them out. So
Wow.
that sends a message to Depraz. 2 copies of Hydroid Craces going into the graveyard thus far. Looks like a couple of Vraska's Contempt and a land.
And that's huge because now, if Depraz was planning to play, for example, a big Crasis, hoping that Glogowski doesn't have access to a removal spell, he just found one. That's the alternative I was thinking about. Vivian Reed, -3, one of the Thieves. Can't feel great, but it has to be the plan what to do with this extra mana that Depraz got himself.
Now, these Thieves, these 2 copies of Thief of Sanity, even if one of them gets removed, the cards that have been exiled by that Thief of Sanity, they're still fair game for Piotr throughout the rest of this game.
Which is why the card is so absurd. Even if you deal with it, these cards are effectively in Piotr's hand. And you don't need the correct mana to cast them either.
Though, getting to the correct mana, not super difficult, at least for what
in the mirror
Glogowski
match,
has going
no.
on.
In other matchups, it's a different story.
So, Vivian Reed getting stopped by a disdainful stroke that was originally in Jean-Emmanuel Depraz's deck. This is exactly what Piotr Glogowski must have been hoping for here. He gets a cast down to deal with the hostage taker on the other side of the battlefield. Everything rocking and rolling here for Glogowski. Just going to get hit after hit in. And yes, he technically, in terms of damage potential on the board, is a little ways behind, but he's got so many extra cards to work with that he should be able to turn that around if he needs to.
Absolutely. We're talking about really marginal differences. He's actually threatening a 2-turn clock, so even that is pretty good for him.
Lots of cards going to the graveyard for Depraz. I mean, there are situations that you could sort of draw up where putting all of these cards in Jean-Emmanuel's graveyard would be potentially problematic. If he finds a copy of Find, then he would be able to get back the best creatures in that graveyard. But right now, it looks like it's dueling. That Llanowar Elves has been on both sides of the battlefield. And hostage takers, they just love it. They just love that Llanowar Elves to tiny little pieces.
Yeah, Glogowski realizing that he doesn't actually have to leave those cards with the Thief of Sanity. At least I don't see a reason why they have to be under those.
And it looks like, yeah, he's just sort of double-checking with Judge Ricardo Tessitore at the table there. If there's any particular reason for them to be in one spot rather than another. I mean, I guess psychologically, you might be able to play with your opponent a little bit. Do you want to kill the one that's taken lots of cards?
Also from the perspective of your opponent maybe remembering which cards were taken in which piles.
Yeah.
You know, to just deduce most of the information. So, I mean, in practice, that's going to be almost always irrelevant. But there is a little bit of something.
Okay, hostage taker taking a hostage taker.
That's how games are drawn, I heard. Hostage taker taking hostage taker taking hostage taker. Not on this battlefield, though.
I don't think so. I think that this is going to be a somewhat more straightforward game than that. Plenty of creatures on the ground here for Jean-Emmanuel Depraz, but the ground not where the problems live. Those are all up in the skies. Thief of Sanity doing it all here in Game 3 of this matchup between 2 decks that we've titled both of them Sultai Midrange, and that is an accurate name for each. But the distinction between the two, pretty important, and it'll be interesting to see how things shake out over the course of this Mythic Championship in terms of which one ends up performing better.
Yeah, and interestingly, Depraz has decided to not run any Thief of Sanity, so he doesn't have access to them in the main deck, but also not in the sideboard.
Lots of cards leaving the top of Jean-Emmanuel Depraz's deck here. A cast down being cast to deal with hostage taker, getting back hostage taker, and there's the handshake. Depraz, well, honestly, he was never really in that final game. We mentioned that there are lots of ways of killing off copies of Thief of Sanity, but when it starts hitting, my goodness, it seems potent in that matchup.
Absolutely, because you're getting so many good cards. You're effectively drawing multiple cards each turn, and with the amount of answers that are available, suddenly you are the one that has more threats, but also answers like that key disdainful stroke for Vivian Reed.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how it almost turns your opponent's sideboard cards against them, because suddenly the player that has that Thief of Sanity advantage is able to then leverage all of the opponent's sideboard cards, which in a pseudo mirror like that just means that you have a whole host of extra threats to work with.
And Thief of Sanity is also a tremendous card in other matchups. Against the Nexus of Fate stack, it's amazing. Against Control, it's really, really good because you can hit counter magic in particular. But even against an aggro deck, if you play this in the main, sure, they have to be afraid of getting hit by it.
Absolutely. We will find out exactly how it is that Piotr Glogowski works his way through the rest of this field. There's still a little bit more standard today before we get back to draft. 2 more rounds to go on this first day of our first Mythic Championship here in Cleveland, Ohio. We hope that you're enjoying it. We certainly are from here, and we will be having more info for you right after these messages.
News desk. Oh boy, things are gathering up here. Hi there. It is end of round 6. 6-0 players include Ben Friedman with an incredible travel story to get here. Autumn Burchett with Mono Blue Tempo. We've already had a chat with them. Reed Duke, Hall of Famer Patrick Chapin, Hall of Famer William Huey Jensen, Slater Claudel, who, by the way, has played at 3 of these things, 1-5, 3-5, 8-8. 6-0 is pretty sweet. Those 6 players, plus a couple more still waiting for results, are going to be your 6-0 players going into the last round. You could have Jensen against Duke. You could have Chapin against Friedman coming up in round 7. Don't go anywhere. Someone who's down on the floor right now waiting to find out who they play in round 7 with Brian David Marshall.
All right, I'm here on the floor with Matt Sinking Johnson. Matt, at the last PT, literally the last PT, right. You had a pretty good finish. Tell us how you did.
I ended up in 14th, 12-4, which then got me silver immediately, 2 Pro Tour invites immediately from playing, one at a time, a year apart. So yeah, that was really huge.
Now, I got to ask you, you come to the event, you do really well. Like, it's really easy to get out ahead of yourself and to, it's a big deal to do that well. How did you manage that result, and how did you come into this event, maybe not with a big head?
I guess I think I put a lot of effort into that, or I think about that a lot, trying to sit down and think about what a reasonable expectation is and try and adhere to that. So basically every Pro Tour Mythic Championship I played, my goal has always been to make day 2. And I really want to draft tomorrow. I love drafting. Getting the free draft at the Pro Tour is just awesome. So that's always my goal.
You Magic players in value.
Yeah, value is nice.
So off to a great start this weekend. You're 5-1. Is there anything that you've done or has shown up in the way you prepare for these events that's maybe helped you have this, so far string of pretty good results?
I think maybe the biggest thing is to try and focus on playing more slowly and getting higher quality practice in, as opposed to just playing too much too quickly on Magic Online. I still do a lot of that, just playing fast and loose. But when I think from testing with some of my friends like Andrew Ellenbogen or Max McVitie or Tyler Hill, where they think really hard, and I just try and look at them and say, okay, I want to think that hard. I want to consider every option and try and channel them while playing, especially aggro decks, especially White Weenie.
When you look at the success of Andrew Ellenbogen, what is that? What's the reaction like that when you get to see one of your friends, win a Mythic Championship?
Well, it was extremely awesome. There's that. I think I was probably less surprised than he was. I started playing again kind of in college, and I went to college with Andrew, and so I started going to tournaments, started going to pre-releases, and at every pre-release, Andrew would rebuild my sealed pool and tell me how to play. And so I've always looked up to him as a Magic mentor, and so I've always seen him as oh, he's really good. And so now he wins this, I'm okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it was still, absurd and awesome.
Can you talk about what the results? He has that win. You have a top 16 finish. You also get to now pull some people up with you, and maybe you talk about that higher quality of practice, and maybe infect that idea into some of the other people around you as well.
Yeah. We have a good group of people from Minneapolis that I am practicing with, Team Tower Games. We have our Team Series team, and then a whole kind of crowd beyond that of people who are qualifying for a few Pro Tours here and there. So I try and practice with all of them, and we help each other out, and it's great.
All right, well, great results so far. We're going to let you get back out onto the floor. You got 2 more rounds today, and then maybe try to get a little better than a top 16 finish this weekend here at Mythic Championship Cleveland.
Great position for Matt Sicking Johnson, 5-1 coming into the last 2 rounds, safely into day 2. Remember, 4-4 is enough to get you through, but round about 6-2, that's where you feel you're in decent shape for a run at the top 8. Round about 12-4, that's the benchmark. Above that, you feel you've got a great chance of being in the top 8. At 12-4, someone generally sneaks in. Just depends on tie breaks, how many people play in the last round. Less than 12 wins and 4 losses, you're probably not making the top 8, especially at a field this big. 499, remember, here at MC Cleveland. Now, I've got some good news and some very good news. The good news is that Brian Brown-Dewin is on the way in just a couple of minutes with a deck tech. The very good news is that Brian Brown-Dewin is trying to decide what puns to use during the deck tech. So while we give him that moment to just decide what he wants to do, we're going to hand you over to Maria Bartholdi, who's been out on the floor talking with other members of the Magic Pro League.
I'm with MPL member John Rolfe. First of all, congratulations on being a part of the MPL.
Thank you.
You've had consistently awesome finishes recently. So what does it feel like to be part of the MPL?
It feels great, honestly. I'm just so thankful for the opportunity. I get to turn my hobby into a full-time career. So,
are you streaming now?
Yeah, I'm streaming at twitch.tv/jrolfmtg. So hopefully people get in there and watch. So.
What are some of the challenges kind of changing your life from being, a Magic player only to like a Magic player, content creator, streamer?
Right, so normally I just have to worry about winning the game, but now I have to balance the chat and everything, so I'm just trying to play medium and be slightly entertaining, I guess.
So what are your goals for this year in the MPL?
To requeue for next year. That's my goal.
Absolutely. Well, best of luck to you this weekend, John Rolfe.
Thank you, Maria.
I'm with Lucas Esper-Bertu of the MPL. Congrats. How has this changed your life?
It's changed for better. Allows me to focus on Magic a little bit more, and I'm very excited to play against the best of the best out there. It's going to be pretty tough, but I'm looking forward to it.
And you've started streaming too, right?
Yeah, twitch.tv/Lucas_Esper_Bertu if you want to check it out. It's been a lot of fun interacting with viewers and all that. It's harder than I thought. Gotta talk to my play, so I play a little bit worse, but I'm getting used to it.
And you've been streaming in English, but you've got a lot of Brazilian audience as well.
Yeah, it turns out most of my audience are Brazilian watchers, and they ask questions in Portuguese, and of course I'm happy to answer in Portuguese too. So I'm doing a little bit of both.
I mean, you've got 2 languages. I can't say anything here. So tell me about this weekend. Are you happy with your deck?
Sort of. I'm playing Sultai Midrange like almost everybody else. I have somewhat different card choices that I thought would give me an advantage in the mirror, but I haven't faced the mirror yet.
So for the MPL this year, what is your big goal?
Try to win something. I think there are going to be 8 big tournaments, and I want to win one of them. I think the coolest thing you can do in Magic is host a trophy, and I want to do that again.
Well, best of luck to you to reach that goal and this weekend.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Okay.